Hello, and welcome to the Brad Beldon Show, your go-to podcast for all things roofing, the latest buzz in San Antonio, local politics, and just about anything else under the sun. Today, we have three amazing guests, Danny Mendez, James Goodwin, and Sandra Medina. Why are they amazing? Because at Team Beldon, on our 78th year, we have 78 team members who have provided over 20 years of service. Of those, 35 have provided 30 years of service. And that's roughly 45% of those who hit 20 years have hit 30 years. And so today we have our last three who hit 30 years, and we're going to talk to them about their journey at Beldon Roofing and hitting that incredible milestone. And Danny, welcome. Can you share with us your journey over the last 30 years at Team Beldon?
Wow, we're going to go back to being in high school those days. I started in Beldon in 1993 while I was in high school, and started as a mechanic. And after graduating high school, Brad had asked, "Hey, do you mind traveling to North Carolina? We have a lot of trucks that are breaking down, and I'd like you to go out there and repair those trucks for us." Had never been away from home, and it's like, what am I fixing to do? And so traveled, and little did I know that I was traveling to a basic training for a Marine Corps in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So very interesting, very challenging. And during that time frame I was there, we also went through a couple of hurricanes. So had a lot of challenges to learn from. During my time frame there, there was only so much mechanic work I can do, and I started always wanting to help on doing other things and making sure things got accomplished. Also asked a lot of questions of why they did things. So learned a lot about roofing. Never thought I would learn being that young and being in another trade and doing roofing at that moment. During my time frame there was many project managers that came in and out of the business, and learned that I had to step up, because during those transitions, there was a lot of things not being done. So I had to make sure that our Corps of Inspectors were happy, and I learned how to fill out government reports, learn the business, learn terminology. So not only was I doing mechanic work, but I was also doing basic superintendent work. Nobody asked me to do that, but I felt that, hey, if you're paid to do something, that you should be willing to jump in and help others. Soon enough, I became a superintendent there in Camp Lejeune, and was managing several shingle jobs and hangars with the assistance of other project managers. Spent about 2 years there, and came back home to San Antonio, and was promoted to superintendent here in San Antonio. Managed several jobs, and during that time frame, I was asked if I had any interest in being moved up to production manager.
That's because I wanted out of that job.
And early in those days, I did not know much about computers, and I got an anonymous email that said, "Hey, why don't you jump in and apply for that job?" And I'm like, who is this emailing me? I thought they were playing a joke on me. I ignored that email, and a week later, I got an email from Brad that said, "Hey, my father and I would like to talk to you." And I'm like, oh man, what did I do?
think it said, "Did you not get my first email?"
Something to that effect. And then I got an email about coming to see them. I mean, I must have been 20 years old when I was asked to come see the CEO and the president, and it was pretty nerve-wracking, because that happened on a Friday, and I was supposed to see them on a Monday. And that's how my career evolved and took off, where they saw what I had to bring to the company, and I saw what they needed. And I've always had leadership skills for people to follow me and accomplish things. And soon enough, I became a production manager, then worked myself into chief operating officer, and moved on, and eventually became president, the first non-family member to become president. So it's been a great challenge.
It's been a good ride. And I think what you left off was, if you remember, the first individual that we hired, from Lee, when we went to Lee High School, because that's where myself and my siblings went, and in the vocational program that was in place at that time. And actually, Sandra was in school with me. Mm-hmm. And so we went to Lee, and we reached out to Lee High School, and we asked them for an individual that was talented in small engines. And many people recall what happened. I asked him if he could grease the front ends of the trucks, because he came in like at 4 o'clock and worked till 10 every night. And he said, absolutely, I'll be sure to grease the front ends of the trucks. I came back the next morning, and it looked like Vaseline was on the front end of every one of our 21 2-ton trucks. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't help but stop. I must have laughed for 15 minutes. And I clearly learned I didn't communicate very effectively. But we called Lee High School and said, hey, is there somebody else that you have? And they said, the only person we have is a young man who's studying electronics. I said, send him this way. And 30 years later, you're still here.
Wow.
So James, you actually got here before Danny, a couple months before Danny.
Yep.
And you were selling my dad an alarm system.
Right.
And he was so impressed with you that he offered you a job. So can you walk us through your journey as well?
Well, I started out in the construction industry, and when the savings and loans crashed, I got into selling access control and closed circuit TV. And one day, a gentleman called at the office wanting an alarm, and ended up going out to meet him, and it was Mike Beldon. I didn't grow up in San Antonio, so I didn't recognize the name. And
that probably didn't sit very well with him, did it?
No. But we installed the system the very next day. They were moving from the house where, raised all their kids, and they were going to build a house. So it took a year for them to do that. But we installed the system the next day, and just following up with him, making sure it was working okay. And he said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about coming to work for me. And I said, I'm going to need a little training. He said, no, you're going to need a lot of training.
Actually, I think you sold him a wireless system.
It was a wireless system.
The first wireless system he'd ever had. And the one that we had in our old house, he had a closet. It was just a massive closet for all the wires. And I remember my dad saying he was going wireless. I'm like, no, you don't believe in wireless. And, I don't think he has any wires in his new house either. I think you convinced him that it works just fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was funny. But that's when we were installing it, I got to meet you and the rest of the family. And 2 weeks later, we go to lunch, and he said, I'd like you to work for me.
It's hard to believe it's been over 30 years, right?
Yeah, a long time.
It's been a very, very long time. Well, I shouldn't say a very long time. It's been an interesting 30 years. You and I have some great stories of traveling, and we'll talk about those. But first, Sandra, you and I go back to 6th grade. We were 10 years old when we met. And so we've been friends. This year will be 50 years, which is, we'll both turn 60 this year. And when you started, my dad was replacing his assistant who'd been with him forever. And he mentioned your name. And he said, do you know her? And I started laughing. I'm like, can't be the same person I know, because there's no way that she could ever work with you. And here you are 30 years later, still here, have held more jobs than anybody in the company. Walk us through your journey at Beldon.
So before I met your dad, I was in the legal field as a legal secretary, and I was kind of tired of it. And I didn't want to work downtown, and I didn't want to hassle with parking downtown. So I told my best friend, I said, hey, if you ever hear of somebody needing a secretary on the north side of town, call me. And at the same time, I tell this story to everybody. I asked my mother to pray with me and say, Mom, I can't stand my job. Will you pray with me to go work somewhere else? And she said, okay, well, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. Same thing, but just I don't want to work downtown. And I said, I've always wanted to work for a Jewish family. I don't know why I said that. So she prayed with me. 2 weeks later, my best friend calls me and says, hey, can you come downstairs? A headhunter wants me to go work for a man, a contractor on the north side of town. I said, sure, what the heck? I met with the headhunter at the time, because that's how we did it back then, headhunters, and met Mike at a coffee shop, talked with him for about 30 minutes.
That was before Starbucks, though, right?
Jim's. I think it was a Jim's.
It was at the Jim's at Blanco and
410. So he said, he called me and said, hey, can you go take a test? And I said, sure, why not? took the test. I thought I failed because all the questions were dumb. I just didn't understand them. And
I don't think my dad understood them either.
the next day he called me and offered me a job, and I took it. And so, of course, he mentioned Brad's name, and I went, Brad. Of course, I know Brad. I never thought the person I walked the hallways with at Lee and
Jackson.
Jackson Middle School, was going to be my coworker and then eventually my boss. But anyways, so Mike hired me. Before Mike's secretary of 10 years, I think her name is Tina, he had what were they called back then? I guess she was just the ones that temporary. He had a temp working in a position, and he asked me, hey, do you want to learn from her for 2 weeks, or do you just want to do it cold turkey? I said, get rid of her. I don't want to learn anybody's bad habits. So I started from scratch. And then Mike became president of the Greater Chamber of Commerce, and my life was crazy for the first 3 months. I had no idea what fascia was. I thought fascia was something that you did to your face. I didn't know anything about construction, and because I was in the legal field. But anyhow, Mike and I had an agreement. Mike said, hey, what do you require of me? And I said, don't ever yell at me. And he goes,
well, that
sure.
didn't last very long.
He said, got it. And then he asked me, he asked me, he goes, the only thing I ask is that don't be late to work. And I think I was late to work one time. One time I was late to work, and that never happened again.
So his philosophy was if you're early, you're on time.
Correct.
If you're on time, you're late.
Correct. So
still is his philosophy.
Our deal was that I would work for him for 10 years. And after 10 years, we'd see what would happen. So after 10 years finished, this is when Mike was getting ready to step down. And then Brad was ushered in as the next president. And I thought, okay, why not? So then Brad asked me to be his assistant. And at that time, Brad changed the title from secretary admin assistant to team partner. So I became Brad's team partner. And it was just sort of like from one baton to the next baton. And it was.
But this baton didn't yell.
It was pretty seamless. And that's how it started. That's how I started.
So of all people, I think Danny and James would agree, you've held more positions in Beldon than anybody else, which I think says a lot about your skill set. So it always happens that if we need to move somebody in the company, I know James always says, if you haven't sat at 6 desks, you haven't worked at Beldon. but what is it about your skill set and what is it about Beldon that allowed you to move across 10 plus or minus jobs?
Yeah. One of the best things about what I do or about Beldon is that if you want to learn it, they're going to help you learn it. So if I want to learn about something, I just go to, or now I go to Danny or I go to James. I say, I want to learn something. Can I take a class? Sure, take it. And you're sent to take a class. And that's kind of how we do it today. But when Brad was president, we were really busy and Brad was traveling a lot. I knew that I had to learn what he did in order to make things work in the office. So I said, if Brad can do it, I can do it.
Well, and Marriott became my middle name, right?
He was very busy. He was gone constantly. So I just dove into that position. I learned what he did. I learned to see what he's looking at. And I asked a lot of questions. And my coworkers were never too busy to help me. And so I wanted to know more than what somebody else knew. I knew that if I knew more than someone else, then if it ever came time for raises or promotions, at least I've had backup. But yeah, that's what I like about working at Beldon. If you want to learn something, they're going to help you attain that goal to learn a new skill.
That's great. James, what are some of the challenges that you faced in your career and how did you overcome them?
So I mean,
starting in the alarm business and moving into roofing, right?
I think one of the challenges I had was just being a better communicator, better written communicator. I remember when I started, your dad had that 6-foot tall pencil and we'd take drafts to him and he'd edit it, over and over again. And
that was before Google Docs, right?
Before Google Docs. And
yeah, I love Google Docs. It's so much easier.
And spell check and everything else. but that, I think just being a better communicator,
has helped you.
and becoming more detail oriented.
And Danny, over the time you've seen, you've had very little professional training. You've learned everything on your own. As you say, you're the YouTube king. So your leadership philosophies have been really, I think, what you've seen from my grandfather, from my dad, and from myself. And how would you say that your leadership style has evolved over your 30 years at Beldon?
Well, I think it evolves depending on who your audience is, right? I mean, I think at one point in my career when I was in production, you're an executor and you're trying to figure out how you make a group of people accomplish your goal. And so that's a different way of motivating people, right? Clear communication.
You don't think it's the fact that you're 6'4"?
That's probably a big part of it. and a big part of it was that I was able to communicate with our workforce, which helped me in my career. But I think as I grew into the president role, it changes because at that point you have to figure out what you're trying to accomplish. And at that point you're trying to accomplish and make sure that you form a team. You're active listening as well to make sure that you're delivering and what you're listening, right? And making sure that that you're able to motivate a team. So it was hard for me. It was hard for me to step back and say, allow my team to grow. So I had to be able to step back and not be in it all the time and have that executor hat in me all the time.
So you and I have always shared the philosophy that integrity is the one thing that has driven us. And you and I talk about we could work out every day, which you do, I don't. Work out every day and you could still be struck with an illness. You can make a lot of money and you could lose it. But the one thing that you and I firmly believe in is that the integrity is the only thing that you can control in your life and nobody can control that. And I think you've done a really good job of using that in your leadership style over the years. And I think that your team actually sees that in you.
I agree. I mean, we always do it right the first time. And I think if you insist that in your team, you're going to be there for a long time and people are going to follow you and customers are going to follow you. They're going to want to do business with you because they know you do it the right way.
So for you to be successful, you and I have always talked about this as well. You and Evelyn are a true partnership. And Susan and I have been married 35 years and Susan has never once asked me when I'm coming home. She understands that you got to do what you got to do. Can you talk about your family philosophy and how it affects your work-life balance?
Well, I think early before, Evelyn and we started dating in high school. I married her right out of high school and we both had a clear head on what we wanted to do in life, had kids young and I wanted to build my career. So, we had clear ideas of how we wanted to treat each other. And a lot of it has to do with understanding what everyone's responsibility is. And so we both knew what our responsibility was. Her responsibility, she wanted, was to raise our kids and be around our kids all the time. My responsibility was to provide for our kids. So we set that standard for us. We always said we would respect one another to make sure that, hey, she understood that work came before pleasure. And so we understood that. And then the last thing was loving our family and loving others. And that's what made us successful. And I've always said, and people ask me, what made you successful in business? And I've always said behind a successful man is a great woman. And that's what I consider her.
I think you and I have one other thing we share in common. We're both scared to death of our spouses. We got to work really hard, right? James, can you describe, you've been here 30 years and you've seen all sorts of changes, how Team Beldon collaborates to take care of the customer? What are the things that you've seen over the years and what we're doing now to take care of the customer?
I think one of the things that we do really well is all the way through when a customer comes into the company, whether it be through customer service or business development, is that we do good handoff on coordinating with the customer. It could be in the call in the middle of the night. We've got programs and policies in place so that we've got emergency controls and we know who the person to call is. So,
do you remember when I was in the MRI machine and we had a customer call couldn't get a hold of me. They called my dad at home,
Mhm.
and then my dad called Danny and said, "You go down to the project, and Brad will meet you there." And I showed up with a boot on my foot, and that customer said to Danny, "You come with me. You sit in that chair and don't move." Right. And I think that setting our expectations high and always being available for our customers
Mhm.
has really helped. Right. Sandra, what role do you think continuous learning plays in employee satisfaction and retention here at Beldon?
Well, I think that if you want to be a success in your job, and I think everybody wants to be successful in their jobs, is that you just can't rely always on somebody else making you want to learn. You have got to want to learn. You've got to want to be better. And if you don't self-educate, I just don't see how that can happen. It's just like going to college or going to school. I mean, you can take the classes, but if you don't study, you're never going to pass. You're never going to get that degree. And I think it's the same at work. We have this great reputation at Beldon Roofing, and I tell this to everyone that wants to buy a roof, is that we're not just better because we say we're better. We're better is because we make ourselves better, because we self-educate, we take the time to learn and to train, and we hold each other accountable. Like James is saying, we have these processes in place, and the only reason those processes work because we all really care about our jobs, and we want to make sure that we take care of the customer. And self-education is a big way of doing that.
So it's funny you should say that. Here in our studio, we brought a consultant in one day, not for the studio. Walked him through the studio, and Danny and I were walking with him, and he said, "Who built your studio?" And Danny said, "We built it." And you're like, "No, really, who built this studio?" And I think Danny, you said, "Have you ever heard of YouTube?"
Right.
Yeah. And you can learn a lot if you're willing to put in the time and effort, right?
Absolutely.
Of course, we made some mistakes in building out the studio, but we learned a lot,
Right.
and we built it to our needs and not necessarily anybody else's needs. And that's one of the things that I think we like to do here is think outside the box and how do you accomplish that? And Danny, I guess that would be a lead into over the 30 years that you've been here, Team Beldon has changed a lot. What changes have you seen that have been monumental in those 30 years?
I think starting with workforce, that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen. I mean, we've seen our workforce retire and a younger generation come in. I mean, that's been a big change for management, right? Because we got to learn how people think and what motivates them. So that's been a huge change. Technology has been another change. I mean, it's just, we're not your typical roofing company. I mean, we take data and we take that data and learn from it and make sure how we become better and making sure that we have the information at the tip of our hands when clients call in. So I would say technology would be the other thing that has evolved around our company.
And technology truly is amazing. And actually, it's probably a good lead in for James, because James and I used to travel on the South and the East Coast without technology. Mm-hmm. And James, let's talk about some of the trips that you and I took, the many trips that you and I took to the military bases and the post offices, and you might even talk about the instance at the post office where we didn't get arrested, where you got to measure part of the roof. Where one of us forgot to measure part of the roof, and we were like 3 hours north of there. Yeah. How do you recall that event?
Not like that. But I do remember, we did a 3,000-mile road trip before GPS. I mean, we had just the Atlas road map.
I think my mom got us triptychs.
Yeah. And, we've seen a lot of different things. Hurricane work, we were heading to Camp Lejeune, middle of the night, come up to Cape Fear, and the road's washed out, and we're traveling along about 60 miles an hour, and all of a sudden to see the road washed out and then have to figure out an alternate route. I mean,
and that still today wakes me up, because that is one of the scariest events that I've ever been involved with. When we saw those lights hit the top of that water and you slammed on the brakes, and we we probably spun around 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
in a circle, and we probably wouldn't be here today if we hadn't seen that water, the lights coming off the water, because we got there before the federal government got there, or the local government, because the road had been completely washed out.
Right.
But
Yeah.
let's go back to the post office that you keep
So this,
trying to hide.
so we go to this post
Mhm.
office, and we had IDIQ work in Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and Brad and I are traveling to go to this post office, and we get up there, and he goes, "Okay, you measure this, and I'll measure that." I didn't realize he wanted the metal roof measured, so I measured the single ply
so now
around
I
it.
didn't communicate very effectively. Okay.
So anyway, we were having all sorts of troubles with the Suburban that we were traveling in. And,
Oh my gosh, everything broke down on that
yeah.
Suburban.
So we're sitting in Huntsville, Alabama, and
It was in the shop, right? We were
Yeah.
eating pizza or
Yeah.
something like that.
we were having the water pump replaced. And so we're sitting in the pizza shop next to the repair shop. And he goes, "Hey, let's go start working on some of these bids." So we start working on them, and he goes, "Hey, where's the measurements?" And I said, "We're right here." And he said, "No, the measurements on the metal roof." And I'm like, "Well, I thought you got that." He said, "No, you were supposed to get that." So we ended up making a trip back to that post office, middle of the night, got up there, measured it.
To think that we weren't arrested for climbing on a U.S. Postal Service
Mhm.
building
At night.
in the middle of the night, and nobody even stopped us.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the other crazy trips is, and this is taking care of the customer, is Brad gets a call from one of our customers at a military base and says, "Hey, I need these estimates on these buildings like Monday." And he said, "Okay." So I get a call from Brad, and he goes, "How far are you from the airport?" And I said, "Well, I could be there in like 20 minutes. He said, "Okay, I'll meet you there." He said, "But go over to this gate." So I show up, and he says, "We're getting on the plane," and it was a Lear. And we got in the Lear, we took off, charging
We
flashlights.
must have charged 10 or 15 flashlights.
Spotlights.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we land, we go over to the base, we work all night, we measured buildings at night, worked all night putting the estimates together, and we delivered them that next morning. And
And you taught me how to measure the height of the building with a pencil. You
with a pencil.
want to tell people how we did that?
Yeah. So we were measuring this one building, and Brad said, "How are we going to get the height?" And I said,
Because there was a fence all the way around it.
"Yeah." And I said, "Hey, we'll just measure it with a pencil." And he kind of looks at me, and he's like, "What?"
This is without any sleep, right? We've been
Yeah.
up for probably 30 hours already.
So I told him, I said, "Hey, it's real simple." I said, we'll just hold out your arm, put the pencil to the top, and mark it with your thumb." And I said, "We'll turn the pencil over, and when your thumb's at the edge of the building, walk out to the end of the pencil, and from there to the building is the height." And he's like, "No way." So-
That's a Boy Scouts and James.
I'm not sure that he was right on that measurement because we've never been able to prove it, but by God, we got the job. Maybe
Yeah.
we were too low.
I think one of the things is being creative, and thinking outside the box is really what we do here.
And even on that trip, the only technology that we used back then was an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating to me how much has changed. I've been in this for 35 years straight, but I started when I was 12. And, my father and I had a philosophy on cutting the grass. We had maybe like 3 feet by about 60 feet. And that was my job at 12. My dad wanted it to look like Wimbledon, and I wanted to just get finished as quickly as I could. Neither one of us was very happy with the end result, but that was my job. But, so I learned roofing, from the bottom up, but, and I tell all the new estimators that are complaining that, I climbed the ladder and came down both going uphill. Right. And we did our own test cuts back then, and we didn't have the roof measurements, and the technology has changed so much, and it allows us to provide such a high level of customer satisfaction. Even stuff that we couldn't do 5 years ago. And had you and I had the technology back then, we would have saved 6 hours plus the time up on the roof.
Yeah.
We could have just pulled it down from, one of the various online sources. But one of the things that we've been working on for a number of years, Danny, is Osby, and it's a managed package on the Salesforce platform. And how do you see that improving our customer experience for our customers?
Well, I mean, as you know, I was part of that as we talked about it, and it was a great idea you had, and we evolved through all our experience here in our organization, and we always said we wanted to be the Amazon experience, right? And I see that's where it would evolve. I mean, we're there, right? We're there where we provide information to clients at the tip of our hands. We're able to have information anywhere we're traveling in the U.S. or around the world. So, I mean, that's helped us get to that. I mean, I think in the future, we'll be able to price out of it and give that customer that whole experience where it's not painful.
And do you see buy-in from the customer? You know, there's so many different ways to communicate with the customer today. You see that the customers are going to start buying into those sorts of programs that are available to them?
Yes, I think because our clients, eventually a younger generation that likes technology, and I think that's what's going to help us evolve that product.
And that's probably a good lead in for you, James, since you handle the estimating side. You know, what advice would you give to a young individual that wants to get into the roofing industry with all the technology that's out there today and the things that change so quickly? What advice would you give somebody if they were thinking of coming into this industry?
I think that one of
Other than that, probably they're nuts, but
yeah.
but all four of us have been here 30 years, so we can't be that big of nuts, right?
You know, I talk to people and I tell them, hey, the roofing industry, for some reason, it doesn't come top of mind as a career. It doesn't sound like you'd have much in the way of technology, but when you look at what we're using these days, you know, we're using drones now to do surveys. We're using infrared cameras on those drones to do moisture surveys. But I think that, you know, for people coming into the industry, we do use a lot of technology. But something that's very basic is building relationships. And I think that's one of the most important things for someone coming into the business to understand, that you've got to build those relationships. It's that one-on-one contact that's going to get you business.
One thing that I don't think has changed over those 30 years is that I think people buy from people.
Yeah.
And
right.
I don't think it's always
Agreed.
price. And I think that when you take care of a customer, they don't forget that.
Right.
Sandra, along those lines, what are some of the innovative training techniques that you've implemented in the HID department?
So what we're doing now is a lot different than we did, you know, back when you were training new sales reps. The new generation of sales reps likes technology.
They
Still
want everything at their fingertips, don't they?
we still get on roofs. We still get on roofs. It's a requirement. Sometimes you just can't get on a roof. So we rely heavily on technology, on the aerial imaging. And these reports are something that I get to train with. And quite frankly, it's a lot easier than hand measuring a roof, of course. And the other thing is that what we've done recently is that we've introduced some digital tools, hand digital tools that each residential rep uses in the field. And it allows them to use it sort of like a stethoscope to show that homeowner what's really going on top of the roof. And again, the homeowner doesn't have to get on the roof, doesn't even have to be outside. It's all done inside the home. And that sales rep, if he does a really good job with that digital analysis, he gets to show that homeowner what's really going on by using the tools that we provide. So I think it's fun. I think the sales reps really like it because there's kind of does all the work for you. And in the end, you get to show that homeowner what their problems really are on that roof.
That's great. Danny, you've seen my grandfather, my father, my vision, now your vision as the first, as you mentioned earlier, the first non-Beldon to be president of our company. What is your vision for Team Beldon for the next 10 years?
Well, I think our next vision we have is growing our next management team, right? For so many years, you and I have ran this company and made decisions. And
I thought you ran it and I just had to say yes or no.
I wish it was that easy. But that's one of our visions, to be able to grow the next management team, the next generation of the Beldon kids. Hopefully my kids stay in it and they're part of that management team. And then comes growth, right? Comes growth and making sure that we're still the successful contractor that customers look out for re-roofs, commercial and residential.
So you talked about your kids being in the business. Both of us have kids in the business. And I think one of the challenges that you and I face, and you don't get away from work, right? So when I went over to my dad's house to watch the football game, I wasn't there 5 minutes and he was already asking me questions yesterday about work. Now, he works remotely at 85 years old. If he wants to work remotely, not coming to the office, it's okay with me. He calls us like 15 times a day. But it's with kids in the business and parents in the business, you don't ever get away from the business. And how do you deal with that?
It's challenging. It's very challenging because you're always wanting to know, okay, what's happening in your world, and not necessarily you always have. Just because we're both in the business doesn't say that we're going to cross paths every single day. So there's times that I don't see him for months, and so when I catch up with him, say, hey, how have things been in your division? So yeah, it's challenging. It's challenging because you want to know what's going on in his world, personally and business. So it never goes away.
But you also don't want to make decisions for him. Otherwise, they won't be able to learn how to make those decisions.
That's true. And then I think that was part of when I wanted him to come work for me, because my oldest, Daniel, graduated during COVID. So it was very difficult for him to find a job that he was going to be happy with. And he came into the business. And the first thing that we talked about, hey, at work, I'm not your dad. I'm Danny. So we got that clear. And we also got clear that he would respect the manager that was in place, and he would not come to me for me to make decisions for him. So it's hard. It's hard for you to tell your kid that because you want to help him, right? But if you want to have them grow up and be successful, then you have to they have to follow the same rules that everybody else.
And that's a good lead in for James, because fostering a positive and productive team environment, especially when you have some of our kids working for you, and in those meetings, how do you do that? It's got to be difficult.
I think I take my cue from you and your dad, and you try to lead by example, right? Offer training, where they need training. You build trust, and you want them to be, enthusiastic in what they do, and try to encourage them to contribute, right? And then praise successes when you have them.
But still, it's got to be hard for our kids to be working underneath you.
It is.
Yeah. Well, hey, when I was working underneath people who are no longer here, they used to say the same thing to me. And I get that because my name is on the sign, Marshall's name is on the sign, McKinsey's name was on the sign. But I think you've seen over 30 years, we don't act that way. Right. It just happens to be our name on the sign.
Right.
And Sandra, your current tenure is with the HID department, and you've been through commercial roofing, you've been through service, you've been through the admin side of the business. What are you seeing that's exciting to you for the HID side and the home improvement products that we carry in your time over there?
When it comes to technology, I think we've come a long way. When I first started, all we sold was a 3-tab roof, a simple shingle roof. And that was pretty popular 30 years ago. Now we sell almost every kind of roof. And with selling every kind of roof, we've added our leaf guard gutters and windows and siding and doors. So all of these products really make our division, I think, exciting, because as a homeowner, as a person who owns a home, you just have to call one number, and that's our number. To get if you want a door, if you want windows, if you want siding, or if you want a roof. And we make that possible because we have such great technology in place. We can show a customer what a door is going to look like. We can show a customer what new siding is going to look like. We can put different roofs on a house, on your own house, if that matters. And to see what kind of roof you want. You're not limited anymore to what's in a book. We can show them everything, kind of like an Amazon, I suppose, experience. We can show them exactly what it would look like. And I think it's just, people love to shop. We just make shopping fun.
Don't you think it's cool with our widget on our website that customers can go on there
Absolutely.
and they can get a price instantaneously just by
Right.
going to quote.beldon.com and
Right.
and they'll know exactly when we're very transparent with everything that we do at Beldon Roofing.
And I think they appreciate that. I had a customer tell us once is that they filled out an online form because they wanted to see what it would cost to put on in your roof. And so when they filled it out, they said that it was so easy. And when they met the sales rep was so transparent, and they ended up buying a roof from us.
That's great. That's great. So Danny and James, we have seen what we thought was would never go away, a 4-ply roof, asphalt, felts, and then gravel. And seemed like the best roof, probably still is one of the strongest roofs out there. And we still see it on institutional facilities. But over time, we've seen 5 to 10 products that really have changed our industry. And Danny, what do you think is the single biggest change for you from a product standpoint? And then James, what do you think?
I think for me coming into the business and even actually working on the equipment was the hot tar kettles. I mean, we were used to hot tar roofs, right? And they would come in after work and we would say, I remember your father saying, that's the smell of money.
That's the smell of money. It was a great smell.
But throughout, I mean, single ply roofs started coming into play and adhesives and a different way of installing roofs with all this equipment not needed. And so that's been a big change for our company to take on new products like that and know that you don't need all this equipment and still be able to get the warranties that manufacturers provide.
So we had 21 2-ton dump trucks because of all the stuff that we used to have to carry to job sites. And now really we drive F-250s or F-350s to the job sites, and a lot of the materials just roof loaded for us. Yeah. It's really changed everything. James, how about you?
But I remember we had 25 kettles when I started, and it was, you'd smell the asphalt every evening. But the industry is changing from roof replacement more to restorations. So you're looking at more at coatings and single plies or recovers. And then the other thing is on the coatings, like PMMA coatings. Those are really awesome coatings, and they're getting rid of some of the traditional flashings that we used to do, like pitch pans and through leads are going to be going away.
So even with those innovations, what you're seeing are better products, better solutions.
Right.
Historically, roofs don't leak in the field unless it's at a penetration.
Right.
And with the technology that's come out with PMMA and really no more pitch pans, I think that the roofs that we install today are certainly going to last a lot longer than they did when all 4 of us got into the industry.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting now that I've been in the industry so long that we're starting to see some of the roofs I sold when I first got in the business to come up for re-roofs. And
our first single ply was an EPDM product. And now we're seeing TPO, we're seeing PVC, lots of changes in the industry.
Right.
And I think it's exciting.
Right. And even, with the some of the institutional work, you're starting to see hybrids. So you're starting to see some of the built up below, but you're getting the reflectivity of the PVCs on top. So that's interesting.
And so what would you say to somebody that was considering a TPO or a PVC? What are the advantages and disadvantages to each product for any particular application? Because they're both great products, but in some instances, whether you have a restaurant or whether you have a strip center, each one serves a different client.
Right. And I think what we do is when we're talking with a customer, we find out what's the use of their building going to be, and if they're going to be planning to change the use of it. The PVCs, I mean, that's great for chemical resistance and animal fats, for restaurants. So it really depends on what the use of the building and how long they're going to hold it. So we try to solve their problems and come up with solutions.
Because no roof is perfect for any particular building.
Right.
Right. So as we close out today, James, your 30 years, and we'll go to each of y'all. Your 30 years, your biggest highlight of those 30 years?
I think the biggest highlight is having the ability to grow and learn and build a career.
And you've done that. You've done a great job.
Yeah.
And Danny, your greatest highlight?
I would say that you come into an organization and you think that, wow, this company has been in business so many years, right? And then you realize that the knowledge is the people. It's a secret sauce of the company, right? And to me, that's been the big highlight, to take a group of individuals that learn and can deliver a quality product. So I would say our secret sauce are people.
So I say that about
Sure.
Chick-fil-A too, right? That the secret sauce is the people. Sandra.
I agree with James and Danny. On a more personal level, a highlight for me is loving the roofing industry. I never thought that I would love roofs. I catch myself driving by homes looking at roofs. So that's just something that I think then in my career that I could say is that I really love the roofing industry.
I think we all do. We go on vacations and we're staring at roofs.
I'm
and our
staring at
significant
roofs.
others are telling us, "What are y'all doing? You're not supposed to be working."
But we
Yeah.
see some cool stuff, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Chris is like, "What are you doing?" I'm taking a picture of this cool roof. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, I sent y'all a picture from New Orleans
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago from my hotel window, and I said, "Well, that's one way to keep water out of the drain."
Yeah.
Remember, they had built a moat around it so that water couldn't get to the drain
Right.
because
Yeah.
that drain was probably leaking. And it's been a great ride. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy the new generation of talent that's coming up within our organization. And I like the fact that a couple of years ago, we started focusing on who's the next leaders of our company. We use the EOS system to help manage and teach ourselves. And then we're using that system to help lead that next generation, so that if you buy a roof from us today, and of course, it won't be mine and Danny's or James's or Sandra's responsibility, it'll be Marshall's responsibility or Daniel's responsibility to service that roof 20 years. I hope that we're retired in 20 years, right? It won't be our responsibility. But it's been fun. And I don't, as I tell Susan all the time, I don't consider this a job. When I come in here, yes, some days are rougher than others, but to me, I enjoy what I do.
Mhm.
And yes, my name is on the sign, but even if my name wasn't on the sign, I don't think I'd approach the world any differently. And for things outside of work, I approach them the same way. And I think that, if you're working with people that you truly enjoy working with and people that you love, it's not work.
Mhm.
It's challenging,
Yeah.
but it's not work, right? I
Right.
mean,
Agree.
it's still a lot of fun. So I thank y'all for joining me today on our
Thank you.
inaugural podcast.
Thank you.
And for those of you who have time to tune in tomorrow, our guest tomorrow will be David Taggart. Yes, a competitor. We talk to all of our friends. And for those of you who don't know David, he owns A5 Roofing. And David had a fire last week, and it was a challenge for him. And we're going to talk tomorrow about the challenges he faced with insurance, the steps that he went through to obtain coverage, and some recommendations that he has in the event that you have a fire. So thanks again for coming. This has been the Brad Beldon Show, your go-to podcast for all things roofing, the latest buzz in San Antonio, local politics, and just about anything under the sun. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you tomorrow.